So I bet this is going to come as a surprise to a lot of people, but believe it or not, for today's ADG Mod video, we're going to be talking about creating your own custom ships to fly in the 2D shooter Tyrian 2000. Now, typically when you talk about modding a game, you're talking about altering the game's default files to change how it plays or behaves at a base level. For instance, if you make changes to a particular map to add some sort of power-up, that power-up is now sitting there every time you play that map. The changes you make are permanent and persist until you reinstall the game from its original media. But Tyrian 2000 actually includes ship editing tools by default, and even has a built-in means of activating your custom ships during gameplay. At least, that's how it is nowadays. I wouldn't be surprised if original releases of the game through Epic Mega Games, back when it was still just called Tyrian and not Tyrian 2000, didn't include these tools or capabilities. But then, I don't know. Anyways, before I show you all the ship editor itself, let's talk about what's actually going on right now on screen. See, I'm playing through various early levels of the game using some of the prefabricated custom ships, which are using graphics pulled from the various enemies that you face in the game. Now, to load a custom ship at any time, all you do is hold the tab key down and press any of the number keys from 0 to 9, as you can have 10 custom ships defined at any time. Or when playing a 2-player game, if you want to set player 2 to have a custom ship, hold caps lock instead. It's also important to note that the custom ships are still treated and played just like any other regular ship. This means if you load a custom ship during the arcade mode and start picking up different weapon power-ups, you'll be equipped with those weapons instead. The same goes for any of the other game modes. Now, if you abandon a level in progress after loading a custom ship, you revert back to the state you were in prior to starting that level. Effectively, there's no way to load a custom ship prior to actually starting gameplay, so it would seem as though loading custom ships is a good way to cheat the game. And it can be, but the game does some clever things to prevent you from abusing this feature to any extremes, which we'll talk about in a bit. Lastly, even though all the custom ships so far have just been enemy sprites, I should probably answer a question right now from one of my Patreon supporters, Alex, who asks, can you make your own graphics for these ships, or are they only custom in terms of stats? The answer is yes, to both parts of that question. So here's the editor itself. As you can see, it's way more basic looking than Tyrian. Heck, even the setup program is more impressive than this. But this was written pretty quickly as an extra feature than as something intended to be professional. And just like the game itself, this editor was written by Jason Emery, so every bit of its functionality is intentional, if not perfectly bug-free. The main screen here has 3 simple options: ships, graphics, and jukebox. Now, the jukebox function simply lets you change what music is playing in the background, and you can even mess with stuff like tempo and advanced starfield effects in the background. The ships section is where you set up all of the metadata for the custom ships. Now, each of the 10 slots allow you to set which ship sprite to use, either a built-in sprite, which there are a few to choose between, or one of 8 custom sprites. Yeah, 10 custom ship slots, but only 8 custom ship sprites. It's the packaging conundrum between hot dogs and hot dog buns all over again. And probably intentional, knowing Jason. Now, you can set the ship's front weapon, rear weapon, special weapon, i.e. the weapon feature that appears in the top left corner during gameplay, the left sidekick and right sidekick, with particular warnings not to try using certain sidekicks in the left slot, as they represent special front-mounted devices that you can launch forwards, which always go in the right slot. Plus you can set what kind of generator the ship has, how many armor points it has, and what kind of shield system it has. Now, some of you might be thinking this would be a super simple way to just hack in a ridiculously powerful ship and win the game with ease, and you could technically do that, but this is where the counterbalancing comes into play. Tyrian 2000 is actually keeping track of how far the player's ever gotten in the game, as well as what weapons they've acquired at least once before, both in the regular game modes and the super game modes. All of the weapons you're allowed to choose between in the editor are limited to those which you've encountered at least once in regular play, and the shields, generators, and armor limits are based on total progression, as in the further you've made it through the game, the more powerful these can be set to. So if you've never played the game before and are using a fresh copy, these options will be extremely limited. The thinking here is that the more of the game you've already seen, the more of a right you've earned to break it wide open with custom content, which I feel is a neat way of doing it. I have noted though that there's some odd choices in these selection boxes, as well as missing choices. Well, the editor doesn't let you go for everything, but it does let you go for most of it. But of course, the most interesting aspect here is that you can add in your own custom ship sprites. Now, while this program does have some rudimentary graphics editing tools on hand, it is by no means even remotely powerful or viable for making fully featured sprites. You're going to want to develop your sprites externally. The editor includes a PCX file used for this graphics editing display right here, which has the default 256 color palette ready to go. Though keep in mind, some of the palette entries do get modified over the course of normal gameplay, although this editor doesn't really do a good job of pointing out which palette entries. The sprites themselves can be up to 24 pixels wide and 28 pixels tall, plus each sprite consists of 5 frames, 1 for facing straight forward normally, and then 2 for banking left and 2 for banking right. The transparent color is palette entry 0, which is solid black, and it's a fairly common transparent color in many 256 color DOS games. Yet, with all this potential sitting in front of us for making custom ships, what should I even make? I mean, it's not like I've made a 2D shooter before and oh wait, yes I have! So just for fun, and to give everyone something to try out, I decided to take some of my original Pixel ships and turn them into Tyrian ships. Using my old copy of Deluxe Paint 2e, I loaded up my original grid of all my Pixel ships and selected 8 of them. The Starfighter, Nemesis, Trigula, Sailblazer, Auto Orb X, Pentagonite, Fighter Z, and Annihilator. Then decided how I was going to convert them into something which looked decent. The original Pixel ships maxed out at 9x9 pixels big. Doubled, that's 18 by 18, which isn't too far off from the 24 by 28 size of the sprites in Tyrian, which, when you consider that the hit detection already has some leeway in it for the player, having a ship that's smaller than the available sprite space, it's not really that big a deal. I also stylized them up a bit, giving them a border and a bit of a 3D look for tilting side to side, a process which was kinda slow going at first until I realized I could do multiple ships all at once. So that's what I ended up doing to speed things along. I also made sure to center them in each of their bounding boxes perfectly. Now, because the Pixel ships have a very dark gray border around them, I also made sure to set the background color to be visible while doing all of this, just so that I could see what I was doing. Ultimately, I ended up with all of these completed ships, then it was just a matter of importing them into the ship editor. A process which I'm not going to show because it constantly flip-flops between graphics and text modes and played hell with the video capture. But it works easily enough, as you just have to move a selection box over the part of the image to grab as a sprite frame, and then it grabs it. Once I had the ships loaded in, I did a quick check to make sure that they all looked okay, then went about deciding on their weapons and such. I tried to balance them out as best as I could, though naturally I gave the Annihilator pretty much the best everything. Then I loaded them up into the game, and hooray, they work flawlessly. Almost flawlessly. Again, the default palette is not consistent, and which colors are changed where wasn't documented all too well, so some ships like the Nemesis here ended up with some color inconsistencies. Either way though, this turned out really well, so I'll have a link in the video description for everyone who wants to download these and try them for themselves. But before you do anything with ship editing in Tyrian 2000 on your own accord, I do have some words of caution. Firstly, you can only have one custom set of ships at a time. If you've made any custom ships yourself, or want to make more custom ships in the future without destroying other custom ships already loaded in, you need to back up the files involved with having custom ships. Now, technically, the only file that matters is the compiled user ship data file, new $$.shp, which is what Tyrian 2000 uses to load and play the custom ships. Now, if you want to give out your custom ships to anyone, you only need to include this file. However, editing someone else's custom ships requires their user.shp file, which is the non-compiled data which the editor can recognize and compile. But there are potential problems with trying to use someone else's user.shp file. The first problem is that if you haven't made the same amount of progress in Tyrian 2000 as whoever made the user.shp file, all of the ships will be set to have weapons and components on par with what would be available to you given your own progression. This wouldn't be such a big deal if saving was done manually, except saving in the ship editor is automatic. The moment you've loaded custom ships without having made proper progression, in other words, the instant you load up the ship editor, that data is lost. Plus, if you run the editor and pull up a custom user.shp file while you have a different new $$ file installed, that compiled file will be overwritten the moment you quit the editor. Basically, what I'm trying to say here is that running the editor permanently makes changes the moment you start it up. So unless you're fully intending to make your own ships, do not run the editor. Otherwise, you'll mess up any custom ships you got from elsewhere. At the very least, make a backup of the user and new $$ files before running the editor. The other problem you'll run into is in trying to load your custom ships mid-game. Well, this is the only way to load them, but you're going to notice a pair of interesting inconsistencies. The first is that rear weapons, special weapons, and sidekicks can all be set to none in the editor, but what you're actually doing by setting one of these to none is telling Tyrian when it loads one of these ships to just ignore those particular weapons. So if you have a particular rear weapon installed on your current ship, and then you load a custom ship which doesn't have a rear weapon, you keep the rear weapon you already had prior to loading the custom ship. The other inconsistency is that your shields will not be adjusted until after the mission is over. Thus, if you have a poor shield system installed and switch to a ship with a good shield system, that new shield system will not take effect until you clear the mission and start the next one. Also keep in mind that if you set your ship's armor too low, switching to it immediately puts you in the danger zone and will trigger the armor supply ship to fly into the fray. But yeah, loading custom ships into Tyrian 2000 is a thing, and it's actually really easy to take advantage of despite its quirks. Just make sure you have the ability to work with 256 color PCX files, otherwise you're probably not going to get very far with it, other than just tinkering with the metadata. Anywho, that's all for today's episode of ADG Mod. This month is a little atypical as we're having a 4th video next Saturday, and it's going to be the mod video that we skipped out on in March, so make sure to stay tuned for it. Provided you don't mind having excessively gory violence added into your favorite first-person shooters. Thanks for watching, everyone, and extra special thanks to those of you supporting me on Patreon. Here's just a small random set of you guys.